What's up, legends? So I was browsing at my local community thrift store, and I was fortunate enough to pick up a copy of Apollo 13 on VHS. And that's because I have never seen this movie, so this will be my first time watching Apollo 13, and I'm excited to share my thoughts with you guys after viewing this film. This movie, released in 1995 and directed by Ron Howard, chronicles the dramatic events of the real-life Apollo 13 mission. And I'll be honest, I did not know very much about this part of history. I don't know, I feel like we just never got quite this far in all my history classes. So this was a complete surprise to me and a learning experience for me as well. Now, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Tom Hanks as an actor. He's definitely one of my favorite actors of all time. So based on that, I was definitely excited to watch this and had very high hopes for this one. The story begins with Tom Hanks, his family, and co-workers watching Neil Armstrong on the very first moonwalk. And during the first few scenes of the film, you can almost feel a little bit of regret and envy that Tom Hanks' character wasn't the one on this mission. Tom Hanks really wants to go to the moon, and I feel like they do a great job of portraying this, not just with words, but with following the good rules of storytelling of showing and not telling everything. His luck quickly changes when they announce that he will be going on this Apollo 13 mission and getting to go to the moon and possibly be the second person to walk on the moon. And here they introduce sort of the internal struggle of the movie. Well, of course, later on we deal with the external struggle of survival and that sort of thing. The internal struggle appears to be this tension between him and his family, namely his wife and his son, who are very apprehensive and very fearful of him going up in space because of the failures of a previous Apollo mission. Despite how obvious their worries and fears are of him possibly dying on this mission, Tom Hanks' character does not seem fazed by it. He is dead set on going to visit the moon. Now, if you have not yet seen this movie, we of course will be sharing spoilers for this over 25-year-old movie, but to sum it up, they go on this mission, something goes terribly awry, and it prevents them from being able to land on the moon.
Houston, we have a problem.
And a good portion of the movie is about them surviving and coming home safely. So first of all, let me talk about some of the positives. I love the score of this movie. Very well done, very reminiscent of a lot of movies from this era. Reminds me of Forrest Gump, The Rocketeer, some of those scores, it just feels very familiar. I think pretty much all the performances are phenomenal as well. I feel like they do very well with what they're given as a script. And so with that, of course, Tom Hanks does not disappoint. However, I will say it's probably not my favorite of his performances. I feel like he may have not have had as much to work with in this film as some other films that I've seen him in. So with all that to say, I did enjoy this movie. I do think it's a good movie. However, I feel like it was not perfect. I feel like there were some things that I pinpointed that I think could have been better in order to make it a great movie. Going back to what I mentioned before about this internal struggle, that I think it seems to be Tom Hanks, he has these ambitions, he has these aspirations that are, again, kind of disregarding the feelings of his family, and you almost get the feeling that he has somewhat lost sight of what's important. And I do feel like they do a good job of portraying this. I feel like you see the callback and the contrast between towards the beginning of the movie, he puts his thumb up and covers up the moon, just showing that that's where he wants to go. Like, that's the most important thing to him towards the beginning of the film. And once he finally gets up into space and they're basically scanning across the moon, they can see it, they can see the surface of it, but they're not able to land. They know that they are not going to be able to do that. And during this time, of course, he is extremely disappointed, I think, that he's not going to be able to land on the moon and that he may never be able to do that. But it's in that moment that you sense that he remembers what is most important. You see him in similar fashion put his thumb up against the earth, and when it really comes down to it, he realizes that he would never trade walking on the moon for getting to see his family again, and of course that becomes the main priority for him the rest of this mission. So again, I do feel like a lot of this was executed pretty well, but my only gripe with it is I felt like this sort of turning point for this internal struggle, I feel like it kind of came too early in the film. Like, literally, it was kind of halfway through the film where this change in his perspective kind of comes. as I mentioned, with a lot of films, including this one, you do have the internal and external struggle. And I think the best ones, you see the resolution of the internal struggle and the external struggle towards the climax of the film. And that didn't quite happen in this one. Now, granted, we're talking about a story that actually happened in real life, so is there really a better way they could have done it? Possibly no, but I think just from a storytelling perspective, it just felt like that struggle, which is kind of the underlying, I think, tension that's built up in the beginning of the film, is kind of resolved, in my opinion, too quickly. And so for the rest of the time, we're really left with this more surface level struggle of just trying to get home and survive. And that's fine. It was definitely interesting, and there's definitely a lot of tense moments within that. But I just felt like it could have been a more powerful if there was both of those internal and external struggles being resolved closer to the climax of the film. Now, I do want to talk about some of the other characters in this movie because I feel like they are meant to be pretty significant. However, at least from my perspective, the only two characters that I really cared about the entire time were Tom Hanks and his wife. Because you had his other two, I don't know what you would call them, shipmates or whatever, played by Kevin Bacon and Bill Paxton. I felt like I was not really invested in these characters prior to them going up into space. Now, they did kind of start to make them a little bit more relatable. You learned a little bit more about them when they were up there, just kind of trying to survive. But I really feel like they could have spent more time building up these characters beforehand so that you really actually cared about their survival. And honestly, I was a little bit surprised about how quickly they got to the launch to go up into space, because I felt like they probably could have spent another 5 to 10 minutes of the runtime to build up these other characters. Now, we did have the other character played by, I don't know his real name, but Lieutenant Dan is what I remember him from. I will say they did a better job with him, and actually towards the beginning of the film when he was basically rejected from going on this mission, I was personally a little disappointed. I'm like, oh man, we don't get to see more Lieutenant Dan, but as we found out later in the film, he did actually play a very integral part. So I think they did a better job building up his character and making us a little more invested in him. But even though these are some of the main characters that we see throughout most of the film, there's also another set of characters that actually got a significant amount of screen time, a lot more than I would have expected for how little we knew about any of these characters. And that was all the people back at Mission Control in Houston, basically helping them solve this crisis and helping them to get home. Now, one thing I have to say is the main hero of this story is not Tom Hanks. It's not even all the people back at Mission Control. The hero of the Apollo 13 is math. Honestly, there was a lot of math talk in this movie, a lot of jargon, and I'd like to think they must have consulted with an actual rocket scientist, because yeah, they went pretty deep into it and definitely kind of left me lost for a lot of the film when they were, trying to figure out all these calculations and figure out how to safely get them home. So even though most of this went over my head, I do feel like that could have been mitigated a little bit better by being a little bit more invested in some of these people down on the ground in Mission Control. Even the main guy there, played by Ed Harris, who gets quite a bit of screen time, I felt like they didn't really build up his character very much, and I felt like they just kind of strapped him in and he was just given orders, and I just didn't really care much about this character or any of these other people. But like I said, they are contributing in quite a big way in this story. So I don't know, I guess I would have loved to see some of the motivations of, even if it was just one of these individuals, whether it be Ed Harris's character or if they picked some other person who ended up coming up with the big solutions towards the end. Now, I get it, this is a story based on real people. Maybe there was no material there, maybe there was nothing to add to this, but I don't know, I just found that back and forth between up in space and back in Mission Control, I feel like the Mission Control stuff just felt a little bit bland, a little bit over my head at the very least, and I think it could have been helped a little bit by adding a little bit more elements of story to it. Now, I absolutely have to praise the special effects in this movie. They're incredible. Honestly, it's probably ahead of its time in a lot of ways. You could tell that they use a lot of practical effects, which I personally appreciate. And I feel like it aged really well. Like Like, it was kind of almost an afterthought for me, just because it was so well executed. I didn't question at any point whether or not they were in space. Like, it really felt like they were floating around up there. And from what I've seen from behind the scenes sort of things, it sounds like they may have even utilized some sort of zero gravity in certain shots. But yeah, I was definitely impressed by that the more I thought about just all the space scenes especially.
Don't you worry, honey. If they could get a washing machine to fly, my Jimmy could land it.
Now, one thing I do want to mention to sort of wrap up here, again, like I said, I did not know anything about the history of this. I didn't know anything about this movie. And I think beforehand, my wife had actually seen this movie before, and she almost made it sound like there were people who died in this movie, and like she almost kind of alluded to that. Maybe she's remembering another movie, I'm not sure, but that actually kind of enhanced my watching experience, because I really didn't know if these guys were going to make it in the end. And honestly, I thought for sure that they were going to kill off Bill Paxton's character, because he starts to get sick at one point. It almost feels like they're foreshadowing to him maybe not making it in the end. But again, spoiler alert, they all do successfully land their shuttle and get back safely. But I will say there are those last few seconds where the craft lands and you don't hear from them on the intercom. It was pretty tense. I feel like the combination of the music, the way they handled that scene, I feel like was very well done, coupled with the fact that I didn't know for sure whether or not these people survived in real life. So honestly, that was pretty cool. But overall, guys, I'm really glad I finally got to see this movie, and it was definitely fun watching it in its original home format in VHS. Again, I would definitely consider this a good movie, and I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Again, because I feel like it was executed very well in a lot of ways. The performances of the actors were quite good. But as I mentioned, I would have liked to see a little bit of an improvement in some of the writing and some of the storytelling to get to know the characters and actually be a little bit more invested in them. But I'm curious to know from you, do you like this movie? Let me know if you agreed or disagreed with any of my takes in the comments below. But guys, if you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, subscribe below, and I think you may want to check out one of our other reviews here on screen next. Lastly, I want to let you know that no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. God is with you and He loves you, and we do too. I'll catch you guys next time.